You are listening to Spiritual PTSD. I'm Damian Skinner, a recovering exorcist and Christian. The stories you are about to hear are all first-hand true life encounters I experienced as a child and later teen exorcist and miracle worker. As a tongue-talking, spirit-slaying, word and faith child minister, I personally performed well over 75 exorcisms before the age of 18. Many of these stories are horrific in nature, many hilarious, but all are embarrassing. This podcast is for adults only, as these stories are disturbing, and I do like to say the word fuck a lot. I'm 19, 20 years old, so it's around 1995, 1996, and I am working as basically an associate youth pastor at this new church that I had just started attending. I had recently left my parents' church because I was really starting to disagree with a lot of the things that were being taught and a lot of specifically the topics and the focus, so much of it being around prosperity, and there was a lot of conversation going on constantly about demons still. And so I had really come to find out I went from one extreme to the next. I went from super emotionally based, name it, claim it, word and faith, to really emotions are a negative thing, very logic driven. It's the word, and God's going to put you through hell. He's going to, you have to submit to authority. So I'd kind of gone from one extreme to the next. And in the very early days when I had started going there, I wasn't officially the youth pastor yet. I was kind of just hanging out, helping in the youth ministry. But they had known me from being a youth pastor and from having the Bible studies, the frontline outreach. And so all that's relevant because a opportunity came up for us to go on a missions trip. Now, obviously, even if you didn't grow up going to church, you know that missions trips are a pretty big part of most churches, especially if you're in that Baptist, Methodist, Assembly of God. They have specifically youth group missions trips pretty much every year. That's been the custom for as long as I can remember. Now, these missions trips are typically to parts of Mexico. They can also be here domestically, which I think is awesome. I've seen some of them go to Native American Indian reservations. Others go and work heavily in a nursing area. We went a couple of times into heavy gang areas in Oceanside, California, stuff like that. So missions trips are a big deal. And they're always kind of mixed with fun because you're taking kids. So, you're going out, you're witnessing, you're doing street ministry, you're doing these kind of things. But then, that night you guys will all go see something that's really cool in that area, or if you're around an ocean, you would go to the beach one day or something like that. So, here I am, I'm volunteering, I'm really getting involved in this youth ministry and getting involved in the church, and an opportunity comes up to go on a missions trip to Phnom Penh, Cambodia, which was amazing. I mean, I had done the Mexico missions trips and stuff like that, but to go as far as Cambodia, it just was amazing. And I have always had a deep desire to travel. I love different cultures. The more bizarre, the better. I love not knowing what everything means. I love being put out of place. I really, really enjoy that in traveling. And so I was 100% determined to go. Fast forward the conversation bits that aren't interesting. It really kind of became more of a all youth group missions trip, and we would take a few parent volunteers with us. So we wound up going and spending a week in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and then another week in China, specifically going from Hong Kong into inland China, different places like Guangzhou, places like that. Now, the first part of that trip, Cambodia, was, and to this day remains, one of the greatest experiences of my life. I mean, I don't have to tell you, everyone knows the benefit of traveling, but especially the younger you can travel internationally. And for me to see so many things, to see, a culture like that, a culture that had been devastated from, the Khmer Rouge, I believe in the mid 70s. All of these different experiences that I had, not to mention first time ever being in any form of an Asian culture. I mean, man, it was just amazing. And so all day, every day, you're hearing, you're seeing, you're smelling, you're experiencing things I had never experienced. But also, I had a chance to see a very different kind of Christian. And I am not exaggerating when I say this. This is one of those things that is, said a lot, and it's kind of become a cliche, but I'm being dead serious when I tell you I could be in the very busy capital of Cambodia, be in Phnom Penh, down in the middle on the street, and I could point out to you the Christians. 100%. I could point them out to you because they were, without a doubt, at that time, the only ones that were smiling. You did not see anybody smiling. If you aren't familiar with the history of what had happened there, to basically all of these people's parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents, but all of these people that I was surrounded by had been touched by this mass genocide of their relatives. And so it was so dark and it was so heavy there. And you would see Christians and they would really be smiling. And they were so happy and so genuine. And I remember how deeply that touched my heart. And I also had a chance to spend time with some Buddhist monks, which I was incredibly fascinated with. I mean, so it just goes on and on and on. It was amazing. There were parts of it that I wouldn't do again. We went to the killing fields. It's very important there. That you go and that you communicate, that you hear, and that you don't understand, but that you acknowledge this horrible thing that had happened. And they want to take you to these museums in the killing fields, and that was absolutely horrific and not something that I was ready for. Other than that, that trip was amazing. Now we head over to China, and what we were doing in China, we were illegally smuggling Bibles into communist China. Now, depending on your background, that either sounds absolutely insane to the point that you would think that I might be making this up, and that's fair. Or you could be on the other side where you're like, yeah, man, I mean, praise God. I just thank God that you had the courage to do what. It depends on your background, right? Let me tell you that for me, going and doing that, it felt very much like I was, again, one of these people that was going to do whatever it takes. It wasn't lip service. It wasn't pretend. I was going to do whatever it takes to save people, to lead people to the Lord, to save them from hell, for them to understand that their lives could be so much better. I'm telling you, I fully believe that, to the point that not only was I willing to smuggle Christian propaganda into communist China, and I don't just mean like we drove across a border and dropped it off at a Denny's, man. Like, this took a lot of work. There was a lot of coordination. There was a lot of issues. There was a lot of scary moments. And, going from, at the time, Hong Kong was still under British rule. So going from Hong Kong, you walk across the border, there's the guards and the communist, China garb, and they've got the AK-47s, and I mean, it's real. And I was 19. Now, what's even scarier, I can keep taking it layer by layer, is that not only did I go, but that I went with a group of people that took teenagers. Fucking 16-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 19-year-olds, all in that range, were smuggling Bibles on their body into communist China. That means that every one of those kids that I took and that I was partially responsible for, they each had at least one parent that signed off to allow their kid to go to the other side of the planet, literally the other side of the planet, with just a few adults, and smuggle Bibles into communist China. You know, it's funny because I this is one of those times I really wish I was in front of people so I could see people's reactions, because a lot of times when I start sharing this story, I get looks from people like, okay, and what's the big deal? It kind of reminds me of, I was talking to this lady one time who had been abused by her parents and been abused, physically abused by her husband. And I mean, he would physically beat her, and she would leave him and go back, and then she would leave him and go back, and she would leave him and go back. And as unfortunately as that tends to happen, I was talking to her about another lady who had said that she had been pushed down. And the girl that I was talking to had this look on her face like, that's nothing. And I remember that having such an impression on me, that somebody had become so used to such a horrible, toxic behavior, that hearing something happening to somebody else was like, oh man, that's nothing. That's kind of what it's like when I tell this story. When I tell this story to Christians, they all kind of look at me like, and then, like, what? They're waiting for a punchline. There is no punchline, other than I grew up in a world to where it was perfectly normal and acceptable and encouraged and championed to send your children to the other side of the planet to illegally smuggle Bibles into communist motherfucking China. And if you don't see the impact of that, then chances are I know very well how you grew up. And I don't judge you for it, but please don't take away the fact that that has many insane implications. Now, yes, I understand that you believe God's going to protect your children. I understand that you probably trust the people that you went with. I mean, the people that I went with as an adult, I was 19. The actual real adults that were there, they were very good, very reliable people. But there was like 3 or 4 of them. I mean, at one time, my now ex-wife, at that time, my girlfriend, got lost in Guangzhou, China for like hours. We couldn't find her. You know, there was so many scary things, but one of the scariest things that happened was we get to China and we go to what's basically a safe house. They had people making sure that we hadn't been followed. We were already prepped before we left the United States on what to say if somebody asked us what we're doing there. We were a college group, which wasn't a lie because a lot of people were in college age, right? It was that kind of stuff. They kind of coached us on what to say, what we're going to be doing. We're just sightseeing, blah, blah, blah. So we're at this safe house on the Hong Kong side. And dude, I mean, they had a full system set up. They had maps. They had an area for women and an area for men where you would go in and you could get fitted for these. For the men, it was basically like a money pouch that would go around your stomach where you could fit small Bibles in them. There's all these pockets. For the women, they had full dresses from the top, from their neck all the way to their ankles, with pockets that they could fill with Bibles and then wear a long dress over. So we're being taught the whole system, and I thought that's what we were going to do, is we would just carry them on our body across the border into communist China. I'm always going to say communist China, because if you forget that point, then you're kind of missing out on the danger aspect. So they sit us down and they're explaining to us that we're going to go into the border in the way that they wanted us to split up and how that they wanted us to go across. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I don't know who's still over there, who's still doing what, where. So I am going to avoid some of the more detailed things that they told us, just because I couldn't live with myself if I got, somebody hurt. So that was doing something like this. So anyway, they explained a few things to us that was like, okay, this is straight up like, smuggling operation. Like, they knew what they were doing. And, it's a little bit scary. I'm there with my girlfriend, Tammy. This is before we were married. So I'm pretty worried about that. And then, there's kids that I'm responsible for. And we did have 100%. I have several people that can confirm this. We did have basically a secret agent or an agent, whatever they would call them, secret police, whatever, that was following us around the entire time. And when we were in our hotel room, he would sit on a chair in the hall just to monitor us coming and going. He would question us all the time when we were leaving, all over the city, whatever we were doing. He 100% knew what we were doing, and he was not buying into the whole college thing. But here's where shit got super real. Like, you talk about testing your faith or your insanity or the level of hypnosis you're under, however you want to look at it. We're talking about how to smuggle the stuff on our body and all that kind of stuff. And then they take us into another room that's just full of suitcases. And they begin telling us that we're going to line the bottom of these suitcases with Bibles. And I can tell this part because I know this has changed. Because the current systems that they would run your baggage through, that they couldn't scan or check the bottom like 1.5 inches. So we would layer the bottom with Bibles, put the false bottom over it, and then put a bunch of clothes and stuff on top of that. But we also had to remember to put it down, making sure that the bottom was the bottom, or all of God's word was going to be on top, and our asses were in some serious trouble. Also, there was concern about if the Bibles fell out when you were holding them up, vertically. It was very stressful. And so we get there, we're all carrying suitcases, we all break up and kind of go through in different little groups. And one of the tricks, this is a common smuggling thing, that we were taught, was to look for a big group, like look for a big family that was going through. And where we were, that was really common. And when they're throwing their stuff, just throw your suitcase right in the middle of it and just walk through with a horde of people. It won't even matter that you're this, ginormous, fat white guy like I was comparatively. So that's exactly what happened. I walked up. All I'm seeing is AK-47s and soldiers everywhere, and I throw my suitcase on top of another family's, literally on top of theirs, and it just goes through in a big old ball. No one sorted it or anything. I look over, Tammy's going through in another line, a couple other people are going through, and some of the people that were native to China, that were living there, residents, they are going through. And as we go through, again, I can confirm this, one of them does get busted, and he was one of the guys that lived there. And they took him away into a holding area, and we were told just to go ahead, and that the ministry would see to him and would let us know what happened. 4-6 months later, the one and only time we heard anything was that he was still in prison. So we get on the other side. Some people are crying because they're just freaked out about what happened. We go meet in this huge mall area. We all kind of rally up together, and we're talking about what had happened to the gentleman that had gotten nabbed, and just everyone trying to figure out. It's very disorienting. What the fuck are we doing? And then, our pastor that we were there with, which our senior pastor went with us, which is really important to understand. He tells us which train we need to get to, and we get on a train and head, I want to say it was 4.5 hours inland to Guangzhou, China. And we've got our suitcases, we're carrying Bibles. These poor girls are carrying just tons of weight, and it's hot. There's no air conditioning. We're smashed on top of each other. They got all these Bibles on, under all these layers. And, man, when we get off that train in Guangzhou, China, that is the closest experience I have ever had. And since then, I have traveled a lot. But I've never experienced this level of feeling like I was on another planet. Literally, nobody would look at me. Nobody would make eye contact with me. Everybody put their head down. And then when you would walk past them, if there was like a window in front of you, like a shop window, which happened several times, you would see them all turn around and just stare. And if you turn around, they'd look down. I mean, in the entire city acted like that. And, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I was being told that a lot of people where we also went further out into farm areas and villages. I mean, that we were some of the only white people that they had ever seen. So it makes sense. But, we get there and we check into a hotel, and we have to make sure that the hotel room is secure, and they have a whole system set up on the hotel side in Guangzhou. That's the part that I'm going to skip. And there was a gentleman that you would open the door and he'd be sitting right out in the hall. He would just look up and smile and just look right at you and just, yeah, I'm here. So what ended up happening is, because we were being guarded so heavily at night, one or two people would leave, like they're going to go do some shopping or something like that. And we would just split up in several groups. None of the kids went off by themselves, obviously. And, whoever basically had, shaken the tail, they went on to drop off whatever Bibles and witnessing tracts that they had. There was a couple of other teams that would actually go out in the middle of the night, like, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and place witnessing tracts on people's front doors and stuff, So it was absolutely a crazy, crazy experience. And I had several what I thought were, near misses of, did somebody see that I had a Bible, and are people following us and knowing already that we're Christians, we had a lot of just weird, spooky experiences. And when we came back, it most certainly made an impression, which the reality is, and I'm not even saying that it's necessarily wrong, the reality of most missions trips is that it's there to make an impression on the people who go do the missions work. It helps whoever they're going to go help, secondly. And that tends to be just kind of a byproduct of the way that this work is done. So when we got back, I mean, the teenagers that went, they were changed forever. Like, no doubt changed. It rocked their world so much. I mean, kids were crying when we got off the airplane, here in the United States. And one of the things that one of the kids kept saying over and over is, I can't believe that we have paved roads everywhere. Everywhere you look, we have paved roads. I'm like, yeah, we're, not all countries are like that. So, there was the benefits of the missions trip, but the smuggling the Bibles and a guy getting arrested that, to our knowledge, could still be there or worse, who knows. It was a fascinating idea to take teenagers to do that. And at the time, that whole extreme Christianity, radical for Jesus, bro, acquire the fire, I'll do another podcast on Mr. Ron Luce and Acquire the Fire, who I was a huge fan of. He was the one that really got kind of militant and radical with missions trips and taking kids into, Russia and stuff like that. And a couple of kids have actually been killed on some of those missions trips. That was a long, long time ago. And I think the courts found it not any of their fault, or I would have to look it up. I don't know. But the point is this was really a time when it was like, you got to get radical. You got to put your neck on the line. And if you don't, you just don't really even believe in God. And I can remember pretty much, I want to say indirectly, but in a lot of ways it was direct, shaming people that didn't want to go on the trip. There was a lot of people that were like, no, I don't think that's a great idea. I also had people that would just come up and ask me, hey, have you guys thought about the security for the kids? Have you thought? I mean, people were worried about it. It's not like, hey, we're going to go and do this missions trip in Oklahoma City and we'll be back in a week. There was a real intensity, and those that went were kind of held in a regard as like the ones willing to do the real work. Not this, yeah, it's nice to sit in your air conditioning and write checks for other people to do the work, bro. I mean, and I got to tell you, that was me. I don't remember a lot of other people even being that way. I think I was one of the leaders in that, and one of my favorite sayings that I quote way too much, especially around the house, my whole family quotes it constantly, is, every villain believes they're a hero. Every really good villain believes they're a hero. I mean, the classic examples, right, of Darth Vader, right? I mean, he did everything he did believing that he was doing what was necessary to be the hero, to take that harder line. And it's this, you start developing this whole end justifies the means kind of a behavior. And, next thing you know, I mean, you're taking 14-year-old kids and smuggling Bibles across a border into a communist country. I mean, that could have become such a horrible, horrible event, especially today, knowing what we know about the human trafficking aspects and all these other things. So, the radical nature, it was definitely there. It was very much a part of that time period of my life. Was I had already been pretty radical in my high school days. What was going to be more radical than that? I had already been praying for people in the middle of the hall for them to receive Christ and for them to be healed. And I'd already been rebuking demons and speaking out against the principle and stuff like that, stuff that we thought were like ballsy, bold for Christ kind of a thing, a soldier for Christ. Where's it going to go from there? I mean, if it's always about aggression, if it's always about effort, if it's always about pushing the line, where does it end? I mean, you want to say it ends when everybody is saved, but what we know is it just keeps escalating into a more and more radical behavior that feels justified because your previous steps have failed. It's like those people that when you show them a contradiction, I'm not even going to call it a hypocrisy, just a contradiction, their immediate behavior is to retreat into a more rigid stance on that subject. And then they just continue to do that. And then next thing you know, they're militarized, they're militant. We think about it from a terrorist standpoint. Yes, U.S. bombs blowing up a wedding is going to turn young people who experienced that and felt that grief and that loss and all of those people in that periphery, it is going to radicalize them. Some of them will go on to become terrorists. Some of them will go on to fight it through education and government. Others, everybody will splinter off in their own way to deal with it. In my case, for whatever reason, in my personality, I was so easily radicalized. I was so easily pointed towards I really hope that I take a bullet one day for Jesus. I mean, here, I'll give it to you this way. There's a book, a very famous book in the Christian circles called Fox's. That was the author's name. Fox's Book of Martyrs. Obviously, a martyr is someone that dies for a cause. This was a book of all of the recorded Christians that had been murdered, supposedly on the behalf of their faith. Now, I say supposedly because as those records went on and you start getting more into the medieval era, you start getting people that were, being murdered for political reasons, but it was all around them not being willing to, take an oath of this king or whatever. Anyway, sorry, I had to nerd out for a minute. But the point is this. The point is, I asked for that book and received that book for Christmas when I was an early teenager. So it's Christmas morning. You're opening up gifts. And at this stage, I was 14, 15 years old. I was already so radicalized that what I wanted was study books. So on Christmas morning, I was getting a Strong's Concordance, which is the way for you to look up original Greek and Hebrew, in the Bible, what the words meant originally, which is actually really freaking important if you're going to be a Christian. But I would get all these study books and all of these, history books from Josephus, who was a Jewish, historian during the Roman era when Jesus was alive. Like, this was not normal behavior. And I had a book And it was just person after person where it would talk about when they lived and what they stood for and why they were killed, and typically by who. And I would just sit around reading that, fantasizing about paying the ultimate price, fantasizing about one day, I'm probably going to be in a situation where they tell me I have to renounce Jesus Christ. And when that happens, I'm going to tell them no. And, they'll put a gun to my head, man. And I'm just going to be like, no, man, I love Jesus. And pow, I used to fantasize about that stuff because we used to talk about that kind of stuff. We would talk about, in the end times, don't even get me started. I avoid this subject for a reason. In the end times, that people are going to have to take the mark of the beast, and you're going to have to renounce Jesus in order to get a loaf of bread for your kids. And, one of the most amazing examples of raising children to radicalize them, when I was very young, like 6 years old, 7 years old, we would get together at the church that we were currently attending, my parents' church that they weren't pastors of, they were just members of. This was early on. And on a Friday night, we would have movie night, and we would get together and watch a movie called A Thief in the Night. If you're a Christian, you've probably heard of it. If you're a younger Christian, maybe not. They did kind of remake this, and this was the Second Coming movie. This was like the original, the OG, and it was made in like 67, 68, 69, right around there, I believe. So it's trippy, weird, Jesus freaky kind of stuff, but it is also crazy violent. Like, it shows people's heads being chopped off and falling into baskets because they won't renounce Jesus Christ and all this. And we sat there, and guys, this wasn't being told like as an interpretation. We were being told that this was what was happening. This was, now hear me out, not that this is what was going to happen one day, not that this is what was going to happen one day in the future, but that we were currently in the beginning stages of this. So it would be like you taking your 6-year-old son and saying, okay, listen, I've got some bad news. The world is coming to an end. It's happening right now. There's going to be massive murder, genocide, massive famine, disease, war, and you just go through and you explain all of it. Or like try some of the literature from Revelations about the great prostitute and the dragon, and you just explain all this to your 6-year-old son. And then you say, now this is happening right now. We're in the very beginning stages of it. Sit down and watch this movie about everything that you're about to experience. And there was 3 of these fucking movies. And we would watch them. The youth group would get together on Friday and Saturday nights, and we would invite our friends from school, bring them in, scare the living shit out of them, of course, lead them to the Lord, and then they would go home, and they're now on their weird religious trauma experience. So this radical idea, I joke about it a lot because, today it's so, I say it's embarrassing a lot, and I don't mean embarrassing like, oh, I'm humiliated. It's embarrassing to look back and realize that I had been that indoctrinated. And I know it had happened from being, from birth. I had really no choice in it. But being radicalized starts with the message that you are communicating to your children. That message of how this universe spins. The hook that you put their faith on. What you're hanging their faith, their belief, that wide-eyed wonder and the beauty and the belief that anything can happen and all of those wonderful things that we want our kids to have and we want to help shape and mold them, whatever you hook that onto begins the way that they are radicalized or not radicalized at all. And for me, being raised from birth, being told that number one, I was born fucked. I was born in sin. I was designed. God intentionally had me born messed up, and then I would need a savior. someone would have to pay a price for that. That whole concept, which is all of Christianity, and that's why I refuse to have any massive debates around all the other points around it, because on the fundamental foundation level, I do not believe that. I do not believe that that is something that I should be teaching to my children. But I was taught that from the day I was born. And yes, it's free, and yes, he's given it to you, and yes, there was original sin, and somebody made a bad decision, and so we're all fucked for all of eternity unless we accept. I know it, I've heard it, I've believed it, and probably led more people to believe it than anyone that's listening to this at any given time. It was my life. And because of that teaching being at the core, that core is what continued, and then it was shaped over it. Now, that same core could go over into Baptist or Methodist and not be so radical. But mine was shaped into this name it and claim it. It was shaped into this demonic demons are just waiting to fuck you up. And you have a bad thought. You just notice a girl has a nice ass, and now there's a demon, and you've given your life over to this thing. This constant confusion over this God that's so powerful and amazing, but we have to tiptoe around how we talk and what we talk about and what we do. And there was just so many contradictions that were just brewing in there that for me, I was kind of like that guy that sees the opening. It's an old football analogy when there's that opening in the line and you just run. It was like the ball was handed to me and I just did the Forrest Gump, man. I just ran. I just hauled ass as hard and fast as I could. And if there was an extreme, I was going to find it. If there was a maximum, I was going to hit it. If there was a way to do as much radical good for Jesus, I was going to find it. And if that meant taking a bullet, dying of a disease, or something along those lines, even fucking better. I really believed that. I really lived that way, and that was taught to me. That was ingrained into me. That is a radicalizing of a child. And as you get older, you're left with the results of what comes from that. Either you are successful in your radical efforts, or you wind up so lost, so disenchanted, so disconnected. I mean, after I left the church, it's been 16, 17 years since I've even opened my Bible. It wasn't even until maybe 8 months ago that I would even have a conversation with somebody about anything to do with Christianity. It so disoriented me to realize and to grow up so radicalized, and then to go through that bell curve. Like that radical, you have people thanking you. Thank you for having the balls to stand up in the middle of school and tell me that Jesus loves you. And you're like, oh, fuck, I was brave and I saved someone's life. I was courageous. And you start feeling like you're doing something that's noble. You start doing and feeling like you're doing what it takes, the highest good. And I know that this resonates with some people that are listening to this because there was a lot of me. I wasn't the only one. But you go through that bell curve and you see how all of that radical good has a backside to it. And that backside is indoctrination into a system that is fundamentally flawed. So it doesn't matter how awesome the conversion is if they're still going to splash down right into something that says, hey, you're fundamentally fucked and you are fundamentally separated from God. And without a certain order of events and a certain amount of rules that we manage, you are always going to be fucked. It doesn't matter. If that's the ending point, then it doesn't matter how radical or extreme, you're still messing people up. And so once I came to that realization, which took way too long, which cost a couple of people their lives, partially, people who committed suicide because of this environment and things that I had gotten them involved in directly with. Next thing you know, you just wake up and you're just floating. Like you walk out and you have a flat tire. You don't even have a belief system to process that anymore. You're like a crashed hard drive. There's an operating system there, but it's so fragmented, it's so fucked, it can't really process anything. And once it is processing it, you don't know if it's going to stop any second. And that's pretty much the way I lived for 15, 16, 17 years. Now, there was a lot of things that I'll talk about over time that I experienced during those years that helped me pretty much detox, that helped me recover, that helped me. That's why I say I'm a recovering Christian. But, that radical nature left me so empty. It left me feeling like I had no way to contribute. And I remember feeling like I had lost all goodness. I had lost my nobility. I used to make this earth a better place. Now I'm just a floating log that has no impact on anything. And I know my atheist friends are like, yeah, no shit. Welcome to the cruise. And I get that and I respect that. But for me, I definitely feel that there is meaning to life. And I don't think that meaning to life has to be a moral construct. So without going off onto a big old deal about my current belief, wrapping up this idea of being so radical that you do something that dangerous is one thing. But being so radicalized that you do it and it is the norm, and that you are the prime example of what everybody else should be in this one specific area. I'm talking about the missions trip. It took a long time for me to realize, and I tell you the way that it happened by me opening up and talking to people that I knew weren't Christians about my experiences. It took people being like, spitting their beer, like, wait, what? What the fuck? You what? I did 2 stand-up, whatever you call them. I mean, they were barely even 5 minutes, but I did stand up twice at an open mic in a local bar here. The first time I got up, completely sober, bombed. It was horrible, but I got a few chuckles from people from some of my, reflections on growing up the way I did. The next week I came back because the manager told me I should, or it'll always haunt me, and he was right. And I was not sober, and I killed it. Absolutely killed it. And it was all humor because about the church and growing up with all the crazy contradictions and, masturbation jokes and stuff like that based off of my childhood, which is what started leading me to realize these people are laughing like that was not normal. And it took me a long, long time. And there are still times when I'm talking to somebody and I see the look on their face, mostly my wife, Taylor. I'll just be talking away about a healing crusade and, how we were all going to the bathroom, checking to see if God had given us gold fillers, because that's what the evangelist told us was going to happen. And I'll just look over and she's like, what? She just has this look of like, holy shit, who did I marry? I forget. And so if you grew up in this, I encourage you just to try talking, try sharing some of your stories. Yeah, it's a little bit embarrassing, but you can do it like I have, which is just lean into it, man. Just be like, yeah, I was raised in it. I didn't know any better. Everybody's had some crazy backgrounds, but you won't start realizing how culturally specific yours is until you start talking to other people, especially from other parts of the country or the world, even better. So yeah, radicalization, it's a major theme I'll talk about a lot. I have a few pictures and that I'll try and post up from this missions trip in particular. But yeah, it was absolutely crazy, and I can forever put that I was a smuggler on my LinkedIn profile. I should do that. Love this episode of Spiritual PTSD Podcast? Head over to iTunes, Spotify, or Google to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's really helpful this early on in our podcast journey. And of course, don't forget to check out our website, spiritualptsd.com, for full interviews, event updates, and to join the conversation. Thank you. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and their guest. All facts and information has been stated as the host and their guest experience them and should not serve as a historical portrayal.